Welcome back to the city. We are now joined by one of the city's health inspectors, Kevin Little. Kevin, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, we wanted to talk about restaurant inspections with you because there's a lot of public interest in restaurant inspections and what happens during those inspections. So when you conduct a health inspection of a restaurant, what is it exactly that you're looking for?
Our number one goal is public safety in regards to food. Anything that goes down a person's throat and into their body, of course, has the potential to carry pathogens such as bacteria, viruses, even single-celled organisms that can lead to some pretty nasty diseases. So what we do is to enforce the rules and regulations that govern how a properly ran kitchen should be operated. And basically the bottom line is to make sure the restaurants are serving foods that are safe to eat.
So I know obviously you follow a large code that lists out all the expectations for an establishment that serves food. But generally, what are the things that you're looking for when you go in to ensure that food is being handled safely?
Fundamentally, there are a lot of just basic, obvious things. General cleanliness, are the chefs and everyone involved washing their hands properly? Are they using gloves properly? The CDC and the FDA have found that there's some microorganisms that cannot be washed off hands. In the past years, it was legal to produce foods with bare hands, and bare hand contact was permissible. In the last year, the rules have been changed so that all ready-to-eat foods have to be handled with gloves or some sort of barrier. And so I'm looking for the most obvious things that would allow a pathogen to exist in the final product. Now, a lot of foods may show up. There's a potential, like with raw ground beef, raw chicken, raw eggs, there's a potential that something like a E. coli or salmonella can be delivered to the restaurant quite unintentionally, but it does happen. And most of those organisms are quite easy actually to kill through heat. The risk, though, is that if the tables or utensils or even your hands become contaminated on the front end, you want to make sure you don't recontaminate the food on the other end after it's been cooked. So what we look for is just that all the procedures are being followed so that the risk of that happening is minimized.
Now, is there a direct correlation between a restaurant's cleanliness and its score on a health inspection?
Oh, yes and no. Again, we are focused on food safety and everything that would potentially harm the food and make it unsafe. You can have a kitchen that to the general public looks horrible, grease everywhere and just messy. But as far as the risks, they may be handled quite well. I remember when I first started this job, I walked in on an inspection, a beautiful kitchen, perfectly ran kitchen, and the chef is wearing a double-breasted, he looks fantastic, and he must have been nervous, and he reached down on the floor and picked up a roll, which had fallen on the floor. And of course, right there, that roll could pick up, who knows, what's on the bottom of our shoes when we walk outside and walk through all sorts of things that birds and dogs leave behind. That makes it to the floor inside the kitchen. And so when he picked up that roll, that gave the potential that his fingers are now terribly contaminated. So even a super clean kitchen can have risks, and a very dirty, messy looking kitchen can actually be quite safe.
And so what are the common violations that you see?
Not using gloves properly, a lot of just general cleanliness. Again, I'm looking at handles everywhere that the chef or the personnel may touch something, that it's clean. There are a lot of little background. It's the whole thing is what I usually see. There's all sorts of little ways of not running your kitchen properly, and it's really the entire, it's a hard question to answer because we see it all.
So I know restaurants are graded on a scale of 1 to 100. At what score should a diner become concerned about the healthiness of a restaurant?
Well, if the score is down to if the score is down to the 80s and certainly the 70s, then that's indication that something's going terribly wrong. There can be situations where even a score of 97, we could shut down the restaurant if it's the right thing. There are instances on that, like one, if a water heater goes out, something that simple, you have to wash your hands with hot water. If the water heater goes out, they have to shut down. So it could be one very small item on the scorecard, but it could shut down the restaurant.
And of course, we post all those health inspection restaurants on the city's website. They're very popular. People like to click on those and see them. How helpful are they to the public?
I think it's helpful, and also there's a lot of background information that maybe they're not privy to. I like the new form. The state came out with a new form last year. When the rules were changed, the Texas Food Establishment Rules, the TFER, was updated for the first time in, I think, about 12 years. And with that came a new form. And it's much more explanatory. There's a lot more detail that I can go into on the restaurants. And generally, if you just look through the score and just think of it, it's pretty obvious what we're looking for.
How many food establishments are there in San Angelo?
We have roughly about 550 permits. That includes schools and some hospitals. There are probably around 400 restaurants, amazingly, in San Angelo.
And how often are they inspected?
It's done on a risk basis. If they're serving a lot of food, they're very busy, 4 times a year. Restaurants that serve raw, they start with a raw product like raw chicken, raw ground beef, we hit 4 times a year. Something like a sandwich shop, maybe 3, a snow cone stand twice a year.
Are the inspections announced or unannounced?
Totally random, and that's the one thing I like about my job is literally when I leave City Hall in the morning, I don't know where I'm going. I pull up my spreadsheet and I see about who's due, which part of town I want to go to, and I just start going to restaurants randomly.
Now, you mentioned we have about 400 restaurants in town, and people imagine these inspections occurring in restaurants, but they happen in a lot of other places, right?
Yes.
Talk about some of those.
Oh, we go to the hospitals and do those inspections. The schools have inspections. We also do inspections for the state for foster home, daycare inspections. And then part of my job also is to enforce, there's a part of the code dealing with sewage. If a home isn't being properly cared for, a business, and the sewer line backs up, then that falls under our code. Thankfully, I don't have to get too close to the issue, but I speak with the owners and operators to get it cleaned up.
So for the food establishments, it's simply any place that serves food to the public. It could, like you said, it could be a daycare, could be a school cafeteria, could be the kitchen here at the convention center.
Could be, and there's a gray area. It seems like it'd be real simple at first, but anytime you're serving food to the public, regardless of if there's money involved or not, that gives the potential to injure someone. So we try to be involved. There are certain instances where we decide based on the risk to look the other way. But again, it's all based on risk.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to explore this. At what point would the city consider shutting down an establishment?
There's some very basic no-go items, backing up to sewage back up into the kitchen. If the water's off or utilities are off, occasionally that happens in San Angelo, and some restaurants are not. They're reluctant to shut down until we show up. But if the water's not running, you can't wash your hands, and just like in the healthcare industry, the safety begins with washed, clean hands. If the water heater's out, and if there's any one violation that is just egregious, and it just is going to be an immediate hazard to the public, then we'll shut them down immediately.
So in order to shut down a restaurant, what would that process entail? What would be involved?
Well, number one, if it's that bad, the health inspector on site would just say, you're finished for right now and stop serving. And the rest of the customers may or may not be allowed to continue. I might go out and tell them what's going on. Beyond that, thankfully it's so rare because most businesses do not want to be shut down, and they generally start working on the problem immediately. Commonly, we'll get a call that something has happened somewhere, and when I show up, the plumbers are already there, multiple plumbers, and they're taking it very seriously and getting the situation fixed before they open.
And has it happened in your experience that you've had to shut down a restaurant?
Occasionally, not often.
Now, how difficult is it to prove that someone became sick from a foodborne illness while eating at a specific restaurant?
Unfortunately, it's extremely difficult. There are a lot of other illnesses that you can pick up out of doorknobs or just through the air that mimic foodborne illness. To really prove that someone got sick at a restaurant, you would have to get a sample of that food. And generally most foodborne illness, the symptoms manifest themselves after about 3 days. Some of them can be immediate, very few of them are immediate. There are some foodborne illnesses that don't manifest themselves for 60 days. Now, when you go back and try to determine where that person ate in the last 60 days, it's very difficult. And again, some illnesses are just what you pick up in the environment at large. And so to truly know that you were sickened at a restaurant, you'd have to have a sample of the food from the restaurant and actually a sample from the sick individual and line up through tests, line up the bacteria or the pathogen together.
Now, I've heard you say before that West Texans' propensity for fried foods actually reduces the risk of foodborne illnesses.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that the less healthy the food is, the safer it is. When you fry the heck out of it or put it in an oven forever, it renders it fairly safe. Unfortunately, some of the most dangerous items are raw, lettuce, salads. Yeah.
If a citizen has a concern about a restaurant, what should they do?
Number one, tell the manager. We see a lot of that missed. A lot of managers really do care, and if they have a concern, just start right there. If they feel that the issue is not being addressed properly, just call the health department immediately. And we all carry phones, and the call goes into the office, and they call us immediately, and we make that our next stop.
Now, I know you get asked this all the time about where it is that you will and will not eat, or people ask, where should I or shouldn't I eat? How do you respond to those questions?
Oh, I can give them a very vague answer like I'm giving you now. So there are certain places I like, and mainly it's based on the type of food I like. There are very few places in San Angelo that I'd be uncomfortable about eating at.
But people can rest assured that they see you at a restaurant, it's probably good to go.
Probably a good sign, yeah.
Very good. We've been talking with Kevin Little. He is one of the health inspectors for the City of San Angelo, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.